meeting to order. And just to let you know, this meeting is being broadcast and recorded and will be rebroadcast on local public access cable, and the recording will also be available on YouTube. Any communications from the public before we begin? I assume you're going to hold your comments until...
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I do have a couple of announcements. First of all, the Massachusetts Foundation Budget Review Commission is having a public hearing on Saturday, January 24th. It's 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Neshoba Regional High School Auditorium, 12 Green Road in Bolton. And the purpose of this commission is to solicit input on how the foundation budget is defined, and I guess they're reviewing the foundation for formula, or the formula for the foundation budget. They haven't done that in a number of years, and they're soliciting testimony from members of the public. They are expecting a large number of people to provide testimony, so they're limiting the length of each to 3 minutes per person. But folks are invited to come out and participate in that if they have input into the foundation budget for education. I'm going to try and go. I'm not sure that I have any comments to make, but I'm interested to hear the discussion. And I also have an invitation, and this is to all volunteers on behalf of the Board of Selectmen and in recognition of your volunteer service to the town. I would like to take this opportunity to invite you to our first annual Volunteer Appreciation Social. The event will be held at the Eagle House Senior Center on Tuesday, January 27th from 6 to 8 p.m. Please join us for light refreshments, camaraderie, and an opportunity to meet your volunteer colleagues. This is also a good opportunity for prospective volunteers to meet current board and committee members, so please encourage friends and neighbors who may be interested in volunteering to attend this event. And that's from Tom Alonso, Chair of the Lunenburg Board of Selectmen. And just a couple of other things that arrived in the mail. I have the 44th edition of the Municipal Financial Data, and it is updated for 2014, and it has quite a bit of statistical information about cities and towns in the Commonwealth and how Lunenburg compares. I'm sure all this information is available in one form or another, but this puts it all in one place. So if anyone's interested in reviewing that, I'd be happy to share it with you. Maybe we can pass it around.
Thanks, Mark.
And I have a flyer prepared by the Board of Assessors, which summarizes the Town of Lunenburg valuation and tax summary. Also a wealth of information. I'll pass that around. And then finally, we have, actually this looks like an advertisement from Talage LLC. They're going to be exhibiting at a trade show booth at the 2015 MMA annual meeting on January 23rd and 24th. I'm not sure of the location of that MMA meeting.
Carrie knows she's going. It's in Boston.
It's in Boston. If anyone's interested in going, I'm sure you can get more information from Kerry. Any other Public information or comments from the committee?
I do have a communication from the fire chief, but I think I'll hold that for the committee reports. It has to do with just earmarking reserve fund. Some repair costs.
Actually, we have the reserve fund transfer requests on the agenda.
Okay.
All right, so we'll probably get to that in just a minute. So next item on the agenda is town manager updates, including the reserve transfer requests, and we have a number of them.
So I sent you maybe last week some information on a couple of requests or earmarks that I received from the two chiefs relative to vehicle maintenance. I'm not here this evening to ask for any action, but I just wanted to make you aware that both the police and the fire department have issues within vehicle maintenance. Vehicle maintenance is actually under the Department of Public Works, but we split it out for the three departments that they maintain vehicles for. And based on their expenditures to date, it looks like both the police and fire departments potentially will be over in the 8,000 to 10,000 range each. But the vehicle maintenance budget as a whole at this point is not necessarily projected to be over. So this really is just to make you aware of these two potential issues. In addition to that, the Library Board of Trustees is represented this evening, and I'll let them speak to their particular request. We also have issues with veterans benefits. I think we've talked about this before. We have a number of individuals that are receiving benefits, and although the state reimburses us 75% of the benefits we pay out, that occurs in the following fiscal year, so we have an outlay that we need to account for this year, and it is fairly significant. I can have some updated information for you as we move through the year, but we're looking at something in excess of $20,000 based on projected benefits. We've talked before about the potential for an overage in health insurance, which may be about $12,000. I'm hoping that we'll be able to mitigate that somehow within the budget. I'm hoping that we'll be able to mitigate all of these things within the budget, but I'm not sure what the possibility is for that. We've talked before about the choice tuitions. The superintendent is still working on that, but we have approximately 30 students that, or an increased enrollment in choice of about 30 students. That's very significant. That's in total, between that and some other adjustments, I think that is about $100,000. So we have some sizable issues to deal with in 2015. The good news is we're in January, almost at the end of January now, and we haven't exceeded the snow and ice budget. We've spent about $210,000 of the $260,000 that we have appropriated for that, and maybe people might think that because of the weather we should be doing better than that, but really most of our budget that we have from year to year is for supplies, for sand and salt, and some overtime, and it's when we have a lot of activity that we exceed the budget, but the $260,000 we spend pretty easily in any year just with the materials and the overtime for our in-house labor. So I think the bigger issue really is in fiscal 16, where we're fortunate in fiscal 15 we have a fair amount of free cash that has not been appropriated. We hold that and we use it the following year to partially fund capital. And in the target budget that I presented I guess just last month to you for fiscal 16, that had about $260,000 in it of free cash to help support the fiscal 16 capital budget. And I'm not sure that that is going to be available. So for me, I think the bigger issue really is in putting together a balanced budget for fiscal 16, because I don't see that that is available. I do think between the reserve fund and potentially using free cash to account for some of these unanticipated overages, we probably will be fine in fiscal 15. We certainly would try to accommodate any of the overages within the budget by making some budget adjustments at the town meeting in May, but we may need to go into that free cash in order to rebalance the fiscal 15 budget.
Okay. Should we pause here and hear from the
Yeah.
library? Please.
Dick Mayu, Vice Chair of the Board of Library Trustees, and Terry Hathaway, who's our interim library director. And
Yeah, you need to speak into the microphone, please.
I'm Teresa Hathaway. I'm the temporary director of the library.
Hi, Teresa.
Hi. Passing out here the spreadsheet that I did for you.
I'm gonna grab one.
The library, through the library trustees, is requesting $15,000 from the reserve fund to help us get through FY15, and this is due to the increase in the electrical and natural gas supply. So what I have on the spreadsheet, just to give you, the distribution on the electrical and the natural gas is not going up, so those figures remain the same, but we are getting a 100% increase on the supply of the electrical. This is more than the other departments because for the last 2 years we have been paying less than the other departments. This is bringing us all onto the level field, so our increase is 100% at that point. To go down here, what I've done is I've given you the FY15 actuals for our distro and our direct supply. This worksheet was also, I was working on this for FY16, so you don't have to look at the green at this point, but, okay. So, and then we have the FY14 actuals. So we come down the distro for FY15 is about $9,000 for the whole year estimated for the last 6. Direct supply, we see the actuals for the first 6 months. This increase took place in December. I have not yet got a bill, so it's going to be interesting. But basically what happens is our direct supply of electrical doubles 100%. So I have left off a little thing here down there, but if you can see the line that says under direct supply, 8,614, that is the estimated 100% increase. So for electrical, we're looking at an $18,000, which we need for the rest of the year. The natural gas supply is only going up 15%. And if you look down, we did the same thing. I have the National Grid is our distributor, and Santa Buckley is our supplier of the natural gas. It is, again, just the supply that's going up 15%. For that one, with that 15%, we need another $12,000 to get through the year. Up on the upper right-hand side, I have what we have remaining in those two funds and what is needed. So that what our request is the $14,577, or to round it up to $15,000. Does that work for you? Can you understand what I'm doing there?
I guess I have a couple of questions. What is the total energy budget for the year, for the fiscal year? I believe it's like 30,000?
It was 30,000, 34. Okay, in I'm doing this from memory. I was going to bring that and I forgot. In FY14, we spent 34,000 on the electrical line. And somewhere under 10,000 for the natural gas line. Don't remember exactly what we asked for in FY15 on those two lines.
I think we may have that here. And how much have we spent year-to-date?
Sorry, I didn't bring that, I just have what we have remaining. Apologize for that.
It's minus, yeah.
So we appropriated $30,336 for electricity and $6,000 for natural gas,
Correct.
for a total of $36,336. And can we tell from these numbers how much we've spent so far? We're halfway into the year.
So
Have
we've
we
spent-
spent more than half of the budget?
Yes. Okay, if we have remaining about 15,000, so I would say we have about 19,000 is what we've expended at this point.
Okay.
That's a quick,
What I'm trying to establish is how much do we project the need to be?
right.
We had a projection, and I don't know the source of this, but from the town manager, the number was 5,500. Now we're looking at 15,000.
Correct. I do believe that our projection for FY15 was low to begin with, and then we did not project that much of an increase on our supply lines.
Okay. Questions from other committee members? I do have some comments.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if I have a question, but I mean, obviously, if December is a guess at this point, I'm not sure if there's a rate change with volume, associated with volume. Is there? Do you know?
For electrical or for gas? The electrical, okay. For the gas, the December is a guess, because we don't get that until January,
Right.
and I haven't gotten that yet.
Okay.
So it is a guess based on, I guess, it's somewhere around 15,000. But yes, this is the time period here in December, January, February, March, where our natural gas really comes in, because that is our heat.
Okay, and you already know what that rate is because you bought in? Is that one of the
Oh,
ones that's on the
It's on
an
the
aggregate
town.
plan?
It's on the
Okay.
town contract, so it went
Okay.
from .7 something to
Okay.
point.
On the electrical.
On both of them, it's the town contract for both of them.
Okay.
Any other questions? John?
I do, thank you very much. In meetings past, we've talked about, or people have presented that the library is in touch with the green communities to get some more efficient lighting. Is it factored in here, or is that something that will not happen until after this year?
It's not factored into these. We do have one project on the parking lot lights, which is going out for bid right now. But I know how long these things can take, so there's no way we can factor those in until they actually happen.
Okay.
There's a couple of other things in the works that we're working on to do that, and studying other areas.
Thanks.
May I ask a question? Your heat stays the same temperature 7 days a week, or does it?
No, it is on a time clock, so
Okay.
that half an hour before closing, it stops heating.
So is there any savings benefits to having 2 consecutive days closed versus currently being closed Fridays and Sundays?
It is something we're looking at. We looked at it once before, and it is one of the things I'm looking at for possible recommendations.
Okay.
Okay. I guess the other question I have is, are there any opportunities to make up some of this in other line items in the budget?
Unfortunately, we're really at the bare bones. In order to meet our state targets, our materials budget needs to stay as is. And then and the only other big thing, well, actually, the biggest thing is the staff salaries.
Yeah, but let me just, two things. One, to John's, there was a green task force meeting Tuesday night, and in fact, there is, the outside lights should be going forward. How much difference that would make actually in the electric, bill is, I don't know, over the course of a full year. Part of the thing that happened, especially with the electric, is we were paying and we're budgeting at a rate that was actually 5 point something per kilowatt when the rest of the town was paying 7, which was an anomaly. So that's what happened. Was with the electric, we went from looking at a budget that was based on 5 something a kilowatt to the present, which is 11 plus. So that is why the electric, especially looking at it for the rest of the year, and Terry did a great job of looking at the actual figures from prior so that we know where we're going, is the major part of that. As far as what happens down the road, as John knows from having been on the board and our liaison before, the state is very specific on the amounts of money that need to be spent in order to keep the library going at a particular level, so that they will continue to supply the state reimbursement. So there isn't a lot that we have that we can work with. Obviously, if we would hope that the board would approve the transfers so that we can go ahead and continue to provide the services that we do for the town. Should the board not do that, then the Board of Trustees will obviously have to deal with that at that time.
Right. My understanding is that the state amounts that we need to meet are in the aggregate library spending?
But it's in the aggregate, but it also has, and Terry can speak to it, particular, especially the materials are the biggest part of that, so.
Right.
Yes, it is a two-part. It's the aggregate, and inside that, the materials budget.
And how much is the materials
The
budget?
materials budget that we need to meet for FY16 is $58,000. We actually get $8,000 of that from the revolving funds,
Right.
which is the fine money that comes in. FY15, it was $57,000, I believe. Again, about $8,000 of that we get from the revolving fund.
Right. Now to the comments. Our practice has been not to approve reserve fund transfers in the middle of the year. We typically wait until the end of the year and then affect the transfers as we get to the end of the year and try and close out the year. I like the way Chief Sullivan put it in his request. He'd like to earmark $8,000, knowing that we don't know the exact number, and we won't know the exact number until we get closer to the end of the year. I'm not sure what the implications of that would be for the library, so I guess I'm open to hear your reaction to that.
Well, we do have some remaining in the budget, as we show here. If we run out of money and can't pay the bills, then we would definitely, I would rather not get to that point, so that, I don't know, it's going to take a month to get money out of it, and the bills are going unpaid. That's just.
I think one of the points is that, again, because of the state funding in our budget, the library is billed separately for the gas and electric. So when those bills come, when this money is gone, we don't have any place in the budget where we can simply transfer money over and say, well, we'll take it out of salaries, because then we can't do that. So it's not as if there's an aggregate sort of place where we can simply transfer money and then come to you at the end of the year and say, well, we owe so much and so much, because that obviously is just, I don't think would work with the way that we work. So it's a matter of, if the money isn't there, then the bill doesn't get paid. So, and that's sort of the bottom line.
Yeah. You have, as I understand, a retirement in March. Does that give you some flexibility with the salary line specifically?
We are not anticipating that at this time. Judging by the research that I have done with hiring new librarians, we are at the low end of what people are getting now. We're not going to offer the position at the top end, but we don't really see a whole lot of savings at this point. It's hard to project something that hasn't happened yet. We are projecting a retirement. We do not have retirement papers at this time either.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, comments? I'm going to ask Kerry.
Well, I did, excuse me, I did just want to clarify that you're looking at this point, spending $6,000 a month in utility bills. Is that about correct? So you're looking at 2.5 months out?
You mean what's currently out there to be paid?
That's what, I guess, based on your guess for December for gas and then your electric bill that you're looking at.
Right. I don't have December and January bills yet. This would be current as of the November bill.
But I guess what I'm just trying to do is trying to get a sense of whether you're spending like $5,000 to $6,000 monthly, if that's what you're projecting based on the $2,000 guess. And the $699 for distribution, then you're looking at $2,700 you're anticipating for December for that, but your electric was at $2,252. Am I reading that correctly? Kinda? No.
Okay.
Not really.
Sorry. No, that's all right. I'm just trying to get that.
I guess what I'm trying to do is just project out how
Right.
far out you.
Okay. If I look at the electrical, I'm looking at about $3,000 for the month.
Yep.
Okay. For the natural gas, another $1,000, so $4,000.
Oh, 4,000. Okay. So
So you have about enough money to get you through,
Maybe 2 months.
okay.
Well, 2 months. It should be 2 months, but I won't go much farther than that.
okay.
I guess I don't understand, maybe we had this conversation last year at this time, why if your FY14 energy budget was about $34,000 for electrical and $10,000 for gas, why it was appropriated at so much less for this year? Is that a conversation we had last year?
I don't recall that.
I don't know. I can't explain that. I did see that in the budget.
Right, right.
I do have a couple of questions for Kerry, if you would, please. Thank you. Kerry, I know during my tenure, we have not approved transfer requests mid-year. But I'm wondering if you could comment on any historical precedent during your tenure, if that's something that that has happened in the past. Is that, or I guess from your perspective, what would the implications of not approving it be?
The Finance Committee here does not have a past practice of approving reserve fund transfers during the year. I've worked with finance committees that have, and we definitely have an issue with the utility budget within the library, so something needs to be done. You know, the town is not going to let bills go unpaid.
And we're not going to let them close the library either.
We're not going to let them close the library. The concern I have, and it's something that we're going to have to figure out, is because this is an ongoing issue. We did have everybody knows the electric rates went up, and they went up much more than what we expected, certainly when we were putting the budget together a year ago. And this is a problem we'll be working with into fiscal 16. My concern is if we appropriate this much additional money into the library, it's going to impact what their required spending is. So I was just working today with what they've requested in fiscal 16, and if what they've requested in fiscal 16 is what is approved, then in fiscal 17, the required spending goes up $4,000 more than it would have. So if we make the transfer here into the library, then that's going to, it's going to be $6,000 or $8,000 more. So I think we have to figure out how we're going to handle this. We left the utility costs within the library so that we met our required spending, and we need to continue doing that, but I don't know that we need to continually artificially increase the required spending because of the utilities, when we just as soon rather have the utilities all managed in one place anyway. So I think we have to be careful about how we do this.
Does that imply that some of the utility bills could be paid for by the DPW?
Well, that's what I was looking at. They certainly don't have the capacity to pay for that right now because they are dealing with the same issue with all of the other municipal buildings, and we talked about this at the Library Board of Trustees meeting that I went to in December. I was asked, well, how is everybody else managing this? And all of the other buildings, the utilities are paid under public facilities, which is part of DPW, and the way they manage it is we probably will do less road work. They'll just cut something else within the budget to make the budget work for this year, and then budget at the higher rate for the next fiscal year. So, I guess I'd like to let the library know that the bills aren't going to go unpaid, but I'd like a little time to figure out what's the best way to approach this so that we're not just causing a problem going forward with having to increase the overall spending. Because from what I understand, this 6-month period with rates, this is what it is for the 6 months. We should expect to see the rates to go back down to something maybe not as low as what they were. But once the rates are artificially high in the winter because the utility companies are required to store oil. As it's a federal requirement. I think it's under the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They require the utility companies that produce electricity with natural gas or coal to have oil in reserve in the event that the natural gas or the coal isn't available. So it's not necessarily an increase, a permanent increase that we're going to see. We will see the rates go back down to something maybe not quite as low as what they were. Certainly not the 5+ cents per kilowatt that the library was either paying or budgeting for, but maybe something closer to 8 cents, which is what we were seeing before.
Right. So what I just heard was we should reassure the library that we're not going to let any bills go unpaid, but we should take a little more time to figure out what's the best solution to this issue.
Yeah.
And it may include a reserve fund transfer, but we're not quite ready to say that's the way to solve it. We need a solution.
Yes.
We need a little more time to get to the right solution.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Any comments from the committee on that scenario? Great,
Okay.
thank you. So we'd like to reassure you that we're not going to let the bills go unpaid. We're not going to ask you to make any cuts that just are not doable. But we need more time to find a solution.
And I also just think it would be helpful to, and I'm sure that John will come back on a regular with, like where we are with utilities and spending, so.
First of all, thank you. It's reassuring to know, and at least now this is out, and with the transfer request, the numbers are out there. And John is our former actual liaison. Carolyn, who hasn't been able to be here for a while, is the actual one. But hopefully with within the next month or so, or a couple of months, if I can reassure the board when we meet again that we've had this discussion, and that something will in fact be done, and when the money runs out, we'll be back. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Kerry, do you have any other updates, or do you want to move right into the capital planning committee? Sit down to John. Oh, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome, Mr. Toll.
I am Jamie Toll. I'm the chair of the Capital Planning Committee. The Capital Planning Committee is made up of 5 members that represent various constituencies in town. Dennis Manoni, who's the vice chair, and John Henshaw, who's clerk of our committee, are both here this evening, and I'm sure they would be a welcome assistance as we go through the presentation. This is a little difficult to read, but you do have your copies. This is a total list of the requests for capital expenditures from the various departments in town. And let me kind of walk you through what this list tells us. In the first column, it talks to the amount of dollars that were requested by the town departments as their initial request. The second column talks to the first cut of the capital planning committee was to prioritize them in a kind of a 1, 2, 3 methodology, 1 being the highest priority, 3 being the lowest, and 2 being the to be determined as the discussions progressed. Each of the requesters came before the committee, made their case, explained the background behind their requests, talked about what the request was for, if it was replacing something, what was the age of the previous piece of equipment or property, etc. What was the lifespan? There's various data behind all this that is available for review. The next column is a ranking we did as a committee from 1 to 25. Of all the 25 requests, the committee kind of ranked them in priority from 1 through 25. And the next column represents, and we'll talk a little bit more as we go along, the amount of dollars if in fact the committee recommended an adjustment to the request. And an example of that is the very first one. The request from the DPW for the pavement management was $600,000, and the committee recommended $250,000 of that $600,000 as part of the annual capital planning process. And I'll talk to more of that as we go forward. And then finally, the last column just kind of does a running total of each of those items. If you add priority 2 to priority 1, it is a running total as we go down. So then I took the town manager's targets that were given to us, and it was something that we used as our talking point as we did our prioritization. These targets are in fact just targets, and as the town manager has stated, these targets may not survive the whole budget season this year as we look at what's available from the state and what the current cash position for the town, et cetera, is. But the targets we used were that there was $150,000 that is already committed of capital going forward from decisions that were made in the past. The 2 major items there are the fire truck that was bought last year as part of the capital process and was financed over a 5-year period, and the Lane property that was financed over a multiple-year period as well. These are commitments that were already made, but portions of that for FY16 amount to approximately 150, and we'll see that it's really 155 as we move a little further. The second item is a cash component, and the target we used as we went through was 600,000, which doesn't include pavement management. So if you move it against the 25 items that were on our original request list, the 250 plus the 600 would give us 850,000 to work with. The next item is the pavement management component, which we changed from the $600,000 request to our $250,000 recommendation. And again, we'll talk about that in a little more detail as we go forward. And the combination of those three components come up to an even $1 million. And I think it'll become clearer as we go forward, but I'd be happy to delve into that. What we did then is we took the priority list and went down it from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 until we got to $850,000, which represented the $600,000 in cash and the $250,000 also in cash, but that was specifically earmarked to the pavement management program. And if you look at the items on the priority list, that gets you through priority number 9. Okay, the running total up until that point would say that priorities 1 through 9 would amount to $848,778, and that is kind of where the 850 recommendation is. We added number 10 because we believed it was the next on the priority list, and it leads to a discussion that we'd like to have relative to financing big ticket capital requests. Just to kind of complete the list, the next slide talks to the priorities 11 through 25 that, quote, miss the cut. These are items that, while we believe are quite worthy, they just didn't make the cut when you look at a limited amount of resources we had to work with. But they also continue to be listed in priority order, so that if we make any decisions that free up any money and we decide, and when I say we, I'm talking about the town, through the finance committee and the budgeting process, and then ultimately town meeting. If we free up any additional money, this was the recommendation of the capital planning committee to work down this list in terms of priority order. One of the things we said is, gee, if you pay cash for the 3 high ticket items, the first 2 were in the top 8 priorities, and the third one, the infamous street sweeper, was number 10. If you paid cash for all of them in 1 year, it would amount to approximately $490,000. And just simple math with no financing involved, we said, gee, if you paid for that over 5 years, you could do that. You could do that with a 1-year expenditure of $98,000, or if you did it over 10 years, certainly within the life of large capital expenses like that, you could do it for $49,000. Now, obviously, there are ramifications to that over the next several years in terms of paying that financing and paying the portion that you didn't pay in FY16. So this chart, which shows the capital funding projection, kind of tells the story. And let me kind of walk you through that. The top item on the chart, and we'll use FY16 as our reference point as we go through this. The top bar, which is, if we're looking in color, is kind of a purple color, is the $250,000 that was targeted for the pavement management program. The next item on the chart would be if we were to finance those 3 big ticket items. And for the purpose of this discussion, we used a 5-year financing at 3.5% financing rate. That would have a hit in the year FY16 of $115,200, but it would also continue through FY17, 18, 19, and 20 at 111.7, 108.3, 104.9, et cetera. So it would have a legacy that kind of works its way through our capital dollars for the next 5 years. Now, John was kind enough to do a kind of a spreadsheet that talks to several scenarios of different time spans and different interest rate projections, so we could very easily plug them in and change those assumptions, but for the sake of this discussion, we felt it was reasonable to say 5 years with zero down payment at a 3.5% rate. But we obviously could redo them quickly in any other component. The next item represents when we actually climbed into the target number of $150,000 that was already committed vis-a-vis last year's decision to buy a fire truck on a 5-year term and the Lane property purchase. It actually turned out to be, that and a few other items, turned out to be 155 point, is that 9? Oh, 155, okay. Which would then, if you did those, if you made those decisions, would leave you $479,009 in cash to work your way down the rest of that list. And several things could occur. One is you could go further down the list, or two is you could increase the amount of money you put in pavement management, for instance, or spend less money on capital this year than the total million that we started out with. And as I mentioned when I started, the town manager has already indicated that the target of $1 million that we laid out may be a little bit too high as we get to real numbers at the end of the budgeting season. Okay, so this is kind of where we are. We've presented you with a list. We've prioritized that list. We've made a suggestion that financing be a consideration in that list, but we've also prepared to make a recommendation if cash was the appropriate way to go. That leaves three kind of discussion items that I think I'd like to leave with the board before I open it up to questions. One is, from time to time we appropriate, the town appropriates at a town meeting items for capital that does not get spent in the year it was appropriated. There are two requests this year that brought to light money that was appropriated in the past that appeared to be, or we believed to be, an item that was self-contained, and when we looked at this year's request, we realized it was kind of dependent on last year's requests. And one was last year the town appropriated a certain amount of money to recarpet the library. It turns out that when that was beginning to be planned to actually be put into practice, it turns out you have to move the books out of the way to recarpet the library, and that's not an easy task. You need to kind of do that in a way that's very orderly and uses the Dewey Decimal System and all sorts of things that I don't totally understand, but costs a certain amount of money that was requested this year. That amount of money didn't make the cut, so at this point they have appropriated money from last year to replace their carpet, but they don't have they don't have a recommendation this year to move the books. Another just example leads to the second one, where the school requests included some remediation for asbestos in the Turkey Hill Middle School. Last year, the town appropriated $138,000 for that purpose. Turns out that was one phase of a several-phase project to abate asbestos in the Turkey Hill Middle School that looks like it will be somewhere between $700,000 and $1 million. The Capital Planning Committee, as per bullet number 2, believes and recommends that larger than 500K multi-year projects should really be viewed and presented as some sort of special event as opposed to an item within the capital budget, and it should be looked at as a multiple-year, multiple-dollar expense and reviewed in that way. So it didn't make the cut. Their phase 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 didn't make the cut, in our opinion this year, in our recommendation this year, but there was 138 appropriated at last year's town meeting. So the question, back to bullet number 1, is, do those dollars should we ask town meeting to recoup those dollars and use them for another capital purpose. It's a question that I think is worthy of discussion. And then finally, the Capital Planning Committee, in the process of looking at potentially financing capital items, is willing, and I believe able, to recommend a process to extend the capital planning process, perhaps starting with next year, to more of an extended 10-year process that lets us look at capital needs over the next 10 years, look at a financing model, look at the pavement management plan, which is an ongoing expense but capital related, and be able to allow us to be much more planful in terms of our capital expenditures using both cash and financing over a longer period of time. A good example comes up is there is a request in the out years, FY 17, I believe, or 18, for a large fire truck that's in the 850K range. You know, we need to plan for that way ahead of time, because if we had the same targets as we do this year, and if we said we only paid cash, 850K would be the extent of our capital budget for any 1 year.
Right. We're also looking at a turf field
Exactly.
replacement, if you will.
Exactly.
And that's a big ticket item.
So that's our recommendation. I will kind of go back to the list, if you will. And Dennis, myself, John, we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions from the committee?
I have, actually, I think the idea of looking out farther for financing makes a lot of sense. I think I would be concerned with financing this year based on looking out, I mean, aside from the $850,000 ladder truck replacement, the fire department's looking out in 2 years for $600,000 for another vehicle, and so it's almost, I mean, so are we going to be adding and adding and adding financing so that within 3 years you're at $450,000 already just to finance large ticket items? So I think before I would be able to make a recommendation to finance anything more this year, I would really like to see how the Capital Planning Committee would address some of those larger ticket items that are just 2 or 3 years away if we're doing 5-year financing or even 10-year financing down the road. I don't know if you folks have already talked about that and put that together.
Well, certainly a couple good points. That's been a concern of the committee deliberations. One of the things that this looking out does, and looking particularly at the larger items does, is to force some decision relative to when we actually purchase the truck. The request for the $850,000 ladder truck, as an example, is in 2017. But one approach might be to meet with Chief Sullivan and find out whether or not that can be moved out to 2020, and figure out whether or not we can smooth this out a little, or spread this out a little more to facilitate us being able to purchase this at another point in time. You know, so yeah, those decisions are certainly not set in stone. And your point is right. We don't want to finance too much too quickly to constrain the town's ability to purchase large capital items in the future.
I'd like to comment on that as well. I certainly agree that we need to extend our planning horizon to 10 years instead of 5. I think the notion of borrowing to fund capital needs to be a part of the strategy, but we need to be careful what that strategy is. When we updated our financial policies over the last year and a half, two, we set a minimum of $100,000 with a useful life of at least 10 years as our criteria for when we would consider borrowing. But in reality, we weren't thinking of $100,000 as the threshold. We just set that as the minimum. We were thinking of a much higher threshold because of the notion that we bought a fire truck last year. We're going to have to buy another fire truck, a ladder truck, in the next couple of years. We're going to need a turf field replacement. I think our thought process was really big ticket items and working financing for those items into the strategy, not $100,000 items. Now, there could be an exception where we decide to take a dump truck and a backhoe, and those combined would be $310,000. You know, and I'm open to looking at that, but I want to be careful that we look at the long-term ramifications of any borrowing plan. When we talked about buying a fire truck last year, we hoped that we would only be financing one at a time. We would pay for it over 5 years, and we wouldn't buy the next fire truck until the first one was paid for. That, to me, is something we should try to do, if at all possible.
Mr. Chairman, if I'm,
Please.
just to respond to that particular point, I totally agree. However, one of the things we found when we climbed into this, we found that although we have stated several times that we don't borrow, we pay cash, there's a lot of borrowing that has been done over the years that we're still, the reason the 150 in committed debt went to 155 is when we actually climbed into it, we're still paying for a fire truck that we bought 15, 20 years ago or something. So there's some of that that's in there, number one. Yeah. Number two, while I agree with you totally, two things happen. One is, as your existing debt comes down, which is in this case the red line, we do free up more cash than what has traditionally been our target. And the other thing that happens, as I know you are aware, the actual levy limit goes up each year, or it's anticipated that it would go up each year, so the pie gets a little bigger when you divide it. Having said both of those things, I agree with you totally that what the committee is recommending is, if we were to go to a financing plan, it would be very much looking at a 10-year plan and saying, what would this help us do that we couldn't otherwise do?
Right.
And it was pretty much prompted by seeing more than just a fire truck, seeing some large tickets, perhaps not 800,000, but large ticket items that occur in less time than it would take to pay off 100% of the one we did prior to that, and would take an extended. One of the reasons there's 3 items from the DPW high on the list is that they are well beyond their intended lifespan. We've already kicked the can down the road, if you will, on the dump truck and the backhoe. And having said that, I'm not arguing the point. I'm just trying to say that we didn't make that decision lightly, and we believe our recommendation allows us not to finance at all this year if that's what the town decides to do.
Just have to draw the line at a different place.
Exactly.
Right. John?
If I may just piggyback on what Jamie just said, I looked at the debt service expenses costs from Karen Brochot in a spreadsheet, and it's interesting because this is not that necessarily that much of a change from current practice. Our no borrowing the policy, as it were, is rather informal and aspirational. In that 2005, we borrowed for a fire truck. 2006, we borrowed for an ambulance. 2007, we borrowed for a DPW multi-purpose truck. 2008, for 2007, we borrowed for a fire pumper. And then 4 years ago, we borrowed for a DPW front-end loader. So it has been a custom, and just to piggyback on what you, Mr. Chairman, said earlier, one of the things that gave us some confidence was the constraints that the financial policies did give us regarding guidelines for financing, so we didn't run the risk of crowding out money in the budget that should be spent on other things.
Right.
In downturn expenses, but you're quite right that we have to be extremely careful about what we borrow when.
Right. Yep.
Right. And I think I'm also just looking ahead to, okay, so this year there was $1.7 million in requests. Next year it's over 3 million already. And then the year after that, it's 2.6 million. So it's almost, without having that look ahead as you, planning in terms of the financing, I'm not sure, and what may or may not be approved down the road. I get a little bit concerned about what happens next year, because if it's a $3 million request, and that includes a fire engine, that includes obviously a lot of things that bring it to 3 million, but I'm just concerned. I think financing should be part of the policy, but I think a long-term look at what we're financing would also be helpful too.
There is one other dimension to this that we need to be careful about, and that's the pavement management plan. At one point, we thought, as our debt service goes down, we might be able to transfer some of those funds over to the pavement management plan. But if we're going to build in a borrowing strategy and manage our debt service, if you will, so that it remains relatively flat over time, then we have to figure out what we're going to do with the pavement management plan.
It was our expectation that we would build a pavement management accelerator in as well. Whether we finance that or not, it would be part of the pie each year, and it would be designed to grow as the commitment was made that it should. The recognition is that it's less than it ought to be.
Right.
And it was the intention of the committee to say one of the ways to address that is to make it part of the 10-year plan and make the objective for it to address that and probably grow as a result, whether it was financed or something else was financed to allow for that.
Yep. John?
Just a couple of specifics. First of all, on the accelerator, really the discussions we have had have been based on the average increase in revenues of around 3.5 to 3.7% per year. It's almost metronomic consistency, particularly since Kerry has taken over 8 years ago, as a possible accelerator for that. Number two, when I looked at the debt service expenses for regular borrowing, actually this does, you're quite right, give us a unique opportunity, because debt service expenses now, if this is just rough memory here, it's around $500,000 per year, going down the next 6 or 7 years to about $25,000. So we have some headroom in addition to the $250,000 we're earmarking from that per year for the pavement management plan. So you do have that. Third, with respect to the borrowing from for capital expenses, the actual debt service costs would be taken from would be taken from the capital budget for out years in this manner, in that they'd have they would be the capital budget of $600,000 or so would be reduced by the debt service for prior years. So it's really sort of, in that regard, I don't know whether we call it borrowing or self-funding in the future. That's, nothing that I've said does counter any of the concerns you have. But at least it's a very circumspect way to do this, I think. And just from a standpoint of practical notion, the committee, I believe, will continue to prioritize the capital purchases and tell Kerry which capital purchases we believe could be funded through borrowing. We would support being funded through borrowing, but that Carrie and her staff would be able to say, yes, this works, no, this doesn't work, because they've got a much more global perspective
Right.
on this. Okay.
Thank you.
One final, from me anyway, observation, Mr. Chairman, is to Terry's point, and I agree. If we went to a 10-year, and even currently on a 5-year, there's actually no consequence, either positive or negative, to plugging something in 2 or 3 years out. If we did this in a very planful way over 10 years that included financing, and someone knew they were slotting their fire engine or something a year further than they had hoped, or a year sooner, or something to match the financial plan, I believe that it would add a little more reality to the 10-year plan. Right now, it's like, you do a good job on 1 year, maybe you think out 2 years, the rest of it, there's really no consequence one way or the other to put something on the list. So when we quote 3 million and 8 million, they're, I don't put a lot of credibility in them at the moment.
Right. Good. Mr. Rogers?
I'm not going to get close to the microphone because I have a cold. Thank you. Just a point of information, John. I thought I heard you say that the debt service was going from 500,000 down to 25,000. Did you mean 250,000?
No, I did not.
Okay. What is the number?
The number is 500, going from roughly 500,000. Debt service cost, according to that spreadsheet, now are running around the $500,000 per year
Okay.
level. In, I think, about 7 years, Dave, it's going to be down around $25,000.
Okay.
Just with current debt, current regular debt levels.
That assumes no more borrowing.
That assumes no more borrowing, which is, Dave, that's a very good point. I should have qualified my observation,
Right.
but that does assume no more borrowing.
Right.
What happens is that some of the fire truck in 2005, the ambulance in 2006,
Sure.
the stuff I listed,
Sure.
many of those purchases will be, those debts will be discharged.
Okay.
So, in the meantime, Dave, we will, as a town, probably assume in fact, we have assumed other obligations. And so that will up that number a little bit. You're right.
Okay. Would it not be reasonable for us to just do a spreadsheet and project this out from the 500,000 and see what the consequences are each year and what the delta is and how much money there will be, the difference between the number and 500,000 on an ongoing basis?
If I may, it's we're in total agreement. As a matter of fact, this is one of those rare times when I've actually anticipated you.
You did?
We did.
Well, God bless you, John. It's nice to see you. I usually see you at the post office.
We did make a spreadsheet a couple of weeks ago. It's still in a very rough,
fine.
embryonic form.
That's fine.
But we're using that. The intent, I think, by the committee, and I don't know if I can speak for the committee itself. My hope is that the capital planning committee will use that to frame the discussion and our decisions
Good.
as we go forward.
Good. Just as a frame of reference, my wife and I and our family have lived here in Lunenburg for 43 years. And during my tenure on the finance committee, it's amazing how this has evolved. I remember like it was yesterday, where we talked about financing nothing more than 3 years. That's it. And then we talked about financing nothing more than 5 years. And there were various increments for what constituted a capital expenditure. And in industry, I'm sure most of you understand, there's an expense factor and there's a capital expenditure. And it depends upon the volume and the level of financial commitment. So my point is, as I look from item ranking 11 all the way down, we have expenses that we anticipate, and I think it's great that what you do, but for $12,000. I don't want to be crass about this, but there's no way in hell that that's a capital expenditure. That should be expensed on the normal course of things. But what we've done, because we've had to, and it's just, and I'm not going to choose my words correctly, but you can read between the lines. If you put it in the budget, it's $12,000, you have to take from something else. And when expenses are going up, and if you could switch it over to a capital expenditure, the $12,000 goes away, so you can use that money in your budget. Get it?
Yep.
And that's what's happened over the years. And it's just amazing. And now we find ourselves, as you folks have so eloquently stated, and so correctly stated, that we're looking down the barrel of some really heavy-duty expenses here. Okay, so what you're doing is absolutely right, but it's kind of difficult and funny how this thing has evolved over the 43 years that I've been here. I have more questions and comments to make, but I'll defer to another portion of your meeting. But this is all I have to say about oh, I know one other thing, Carrie. May I ask a question through you, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Is there any way that we can, not escrow, but appropriate or put money aside in anticipation of, I think I know the answer, but in anticipation of large expenditures? Like, could we put 100 grand away for the next whatever?
So we did have this conversation, Jamie and John and I. So we have a couple of different things. You can have, some towns have a stabilization fund for capital projects. So we certainly could do that. You can have any number of stabilization funds. Other than that, it's kind of tough. You could have a warrant article. And we had talked about doing something like that, but it's tough to set aside money to hold for another year unless it's in the stabilization fund. And then the issue with the stabilization fund is just a higher quantum of vote to take it out, 2/3 rather than a simple majority. But that's pretty much what you do, a stabilization fund.
And personally, I think that could be a good strategy if we weren't already facing several big-ticket items. If we get past some of those items, then we might be able to anticipate the big-ticket items and save for them in advance. Yes, John?
Well, this is certainly aspirational, wishful thinking, Mr. Chairman. But one of the things that we were thinking about is if we could, in fact, get some of these big-ticket items moved in the future, it may give us some wiggle room to do something like that. But again, it may not be reality-based thinking because, of course, we have so many other claims on the town's resources. Right. The second thing, just to piggyback on the stabilization account notion or idea, is that, as I recall, our policies say that cumulative stabilization funds should be no more than 5% of the total budget, which means that if, in fact, we get a hefty dedicated stabilization fund for in anticipation of high-ticket capital items, we necessarily crowd out some of the other stabilization fund, I believe. No, maybe I'm wrong.
Just to clarify, the minimum is 5%.
Minimum, okay.
The maximum, we said, would be 10%.
And I wrote it. Thank you.
You wrote many things, that's probably why it was. And actually, I don't know if this is, since we're going, like into space with our thinking now, then just to go a little bit further, I wondered whether or not the Capital Planning Committee could, if it would make any sense, actually forget about 10 years and look at a 20-year big vehicle replacement schedule and actually separate out those costs from the annual items requested and set aside funding for the bigger 20-year cycle of replacements for those big vehicles, and determine whether you would be financing or not within that structure and those items, and then the items that are not so big ticket, that are like much that tend to get pushed aside. But basically, if you look at page 2, yeah, if you don't get 1 or 2 vehicles, you've done everything. And I wonder if that's a possibility or not, or even if it makes any sense.
Mr. Chairman, three comments. One, I'll take them backwards. To Terry's point, yes, you can. And in fact, by default, we kind of do that. I mean, there are certain items like police cruisers where they're on a replacement cycle. You know you're going to have them. You buy a couple at a time so the numbers get big enough to be considered, capital items. But the point is, you don't debate whether you need one. You know a schedule, you know the maintenance schedule, et cetera. Yes, you could do the same thing with a fire truck, and yes, it probably ought to be greater than 10. I'm not sure 20, but whatever. And yes, that's possible. 2 other points, though, if I might, Mr. Chairman. One is I think John is being very modest. He has done an incredible job of doing several versions of spreadsheets, and we do have the data out a number of years with a number of different scenarios, and they do talk to how the 500,000 comes down to 5, what would happen if you spent it, what would happen if you didn't spend it, how it relates to the procedures and policies that the Finance Committee put in place. And all that data is available. I didn't want to kind of cloud the presentation with it, but it's there.
Sure.
Okay. The other thing is I do want to recognize Mr. Rogers' point. We had considerable debate about a number of items that were on the request list, whether they were, in fact, capital or not. In fact, we actually took 1 or 2 items off the list because they clearly didn't meet anybody's definition of capital. Some of them, we felt that while they weren't capital in and of themselves, they led to a large capital decision, and therefore they were should be considered along with other capital. And then finally, there are some items that just are non-recurring, one-time expenses that you have to put someplace. And this is a forum to make that happen. But we did, in fact, pay attention to what your FinCom definition of capital was, and we did kind of look at all the requests through that filter.
Yeah. And I think going forward, that's a policy that we don't expect to be set in stone. We do need to review it annually. And I think it's a great point that if it's a recurring item, we should consider moving that to expense. Are we ready to get into specific line items?
Sure.
I guess I have 2 that I'm interested to get your perspective on. One is the street sweeper. You knew that was coming. And the other is the asbestos abatement. In the detail that in one of John's many spreadsheets, it looks like that is being spread over 4 years. I'm looking to understand the rationale for spreading that out rather than, taking on one big project and finance it to get it done versus spread it out over a period of time. Is that the logistics of being able to do the abatement? Is that what's driving it?
That certainly is a large part of it, if I may interject. And I apologize. In that the asbestos abatement would be done during summer vacation when the building is vacated. So the school has done a very good job of parsing this out over, I think it is 7 summers with 8 specific phases of the project to do this work. So it's as much forced, I think, logistic and by opportunity than anything else. Dennis, did you want to? You moved up. Did you want to add anything?
Dennis Minoni on Capital Planning Committee. I would just say, we went back and did our due diligence. We went back and looked at it again, and because it was a multi-year project, we thought that it needed another set of eyes on it. It is such a big project. Things are still up in the air of what that school may need in 5 to 10 years, and with our projections that we did, that's a huge chunk out of the capital, and we felt that it would better be prudent to wait on that a little bit and get some more information rather than commit to a 7-year plan, which will drastically lower our funding purposes for other departments as well. And some of the things were up in the air as far as what that might look like. if the school committee came back and recommended that that would have to be renovated, various scenarios. There was just too many variables at that point.
Fair enough. And about the street sweeper?
Yeah, the street sweeper, couple of points. One is it is the 10th priority, so in fact, it kind of missed the cut, okay? However, one of the reasons the street sweeper missed the cut last year is we didn't feel we had enough good data relative to outsourcing versus purchase.
Right.
Jack did a very good job of putting that data together, and the best we could, without knowing the weather and things, how many passes it takes and things like that, the best we could assess in a ballpark kind of way was that the annual operating expense to outsource that or to do it without buying a new street sweeper would be in the area of $35,000 to $40,000. And what we said is, while that doesn't exist in Jack's operating budget, and if the street sweeper doesn't make the cut, he's going to have to find a place to pay for that. All right. If we were to finance that particular thing, the annual nut on it would probably be in the vicinity or lower than the 35 to 40. So that's how it ended up on the cusp, if you will.
Right. And what's the expected life? That's a long...
Well, that's an interesting one. Jack's documentation says 7 to 8 years, but the one we have now is going on like year 22. So, we used above 10 to make it worthy of financing, but it really depends on. I have a feeling if we gave them a new street sweeper, they'd take pretty good care of it, because it may be the last one they see in our tenure.
Okay. Other detailed questions, line item questions?
I actually do have one. So you have town hall painting on there? Plan for this building taken into account?
The rationale for that, and I have to admit, I personally have mixed emotions on it, because I also sit on the Building Reuse Committee, as you know. We have postponed painting this building several times based on the fact that we didn't know the future of the building. And the rationale for that was there was originally an item in the capital request that was the beginning. It was an it was actually over $1 million 5-year plan, but 85,000 of it was in year one, which would have been FY16, and that was to begin an engineering planning that would lead to 4 years of construction to actually renovate this building without knowing its future, just to do it in a way that stabilized the structure, reinforced the infrastructure of the building, did painting, did some other things. It was clearly felt that was, without knowing the future of the building, that was kind of silly. But we asked Jack to get a quote on what it would cost to keep the building from further deteriorating by putting a coat of paint on it and filling some minor cracks and things like that. And we felt that he came back with a quote of, what was it, 40? 48?
46.2, I think.
46.2.
Okay, 46,200. We thought that was a kind of a bargain, given what we had originally heard in years of looking at that. Now, we did ask Jack to go back and be sure that that quote that he got in 2012 was still going to be real, and we had not yet totally closed the loop on it. But we felt that it was an asset of the town that we shouldn't let further deteriorate, and that's why it got prioritized where it did.
Just similarly, when the painter came back and re-looked at the town hall, we also asked the painter through Jack to quote the senior center paint exterior and trim, because the seniors, it was inconceivable to us, or curious to us, that the senior center painting would be fully 1/3 of the town hall painting. And so we wanted to see if we had, if we could get a better deal from this company.
Other questions?
No, actually, you guys did a great job putting the presentation together. I understand it. Thank you.
You good?
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
Jamie, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, did you have other questions?
Not about this. Do you have a period of time after the meeting for public discussion?
We can certainly do that, yes. Yeah. Okay. Do we have any further discussion on this particular item? I don't think we're going to make any decisions tonight in terms of any borrowing that might accompany part of the capital plan.
I just have a question. Are you folks meeting again?
We are, we just don't know when.
Okay.
But we definitely are. We have to congregate and decide when everybody's available.
Okay.
It'll be a meeting that talks about the out years.
Okay.
Right. And at some point, we'll have to make our recommendation.
Yep.
Yes,
sir.
On, where to draw the line with the capital. Do we do so with some borrowing in mind, or what?
Yep.
So, okay. Okay, we have minutes from January 8th, I believe.
Make a motion to accept the minutes of January 8th.
Second?
Thank you. Any discussion?
Did you want to review? Did you saw them?
I think I read them.
Okay.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No one opposed. Minutes are approved. Committee updates. John? I guess we just heard from capital planning.
Yeah,
so-
nothing on capital. I also don't bother Jack in the run-up to a storm. And the only other thing is the PAC, the newly constituted PAC, will meet on Wednesday, January 20th, 6 days from today, talking about the budget and expenditures. That's it.
Okay. I guess we heard from the library tonight, too. Anything else on the library? Public safety, Terry.
Well, basically, the reserve fund transfers were discussed. One of the things I would like to put on the next meeting agenda is to have a discussion among the Finance Committee in terms of, the question was raised by both chiefs, actually, around personnel requests that were in the budget and what the tenor of the board is in terms of making any recommendations around personnel. I think it might be good to just talk, have a general discussion, I think, about how we do feel about making any personnel recommendations at this time.
For fiscal year 16?
Yes, for police and fire.
Okay.
That's where the request came from, but I think that we've had ongoing discussions around talking about contract commitments and what effect that might have, or looking at the retirement issues and the OPEB liabilities and other things that are coming up in terms of what our sense is in terms of making any recommendations around personnel increases.
Well, I know we have a target budget that's been established by the town manager. To the extent that there's room within the target that might allow for increase in personnel, I'd be open to that.
Yeah,
if it fits in the target.
Right,
If it doesn't fit in the target,
Then right.
we just don't have the money.
Right.
We've been talking about trying to get to 24-hour coverage at the fire station for several years now. We've been talking about the need to increase the number of police officers for several years now, and we haven't been able to do it. So if there's money available, and we're not compromising something else that's important, then I'd be open to it. But until and unless there's money to support it, I'd say no.
Okay. No, I just basically, it was just one of the continuing agenda items has been to take a look at contract commitments and things like that.
Yeah, I thought there might be room in the police budget for an extra officer, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I think they had put funds in to be able to put per diem fire to get the
Well,
24/7 coverage,
Two different things.
right?
Chief Sullivan wanted to put per diem to get the coverage at the fire station, and Chief Marino wanted to add a police officer.
Right. Yeah, no, I just think that in the budget itself, and I may be wrong about this, but I thought fire was addressed and police was not.
Oh, we
That's
haven't
my-
seen their budgets yet, so I think it's,
I think in the target budget, I think.
In the target budget, there was funding set aside for per diem, 24/7 per diem coverage in the fire department. On the police side, there was additional funding for overtime, there was additional funding for the prisoner watch, and there was additional funding for the desk.
Okay.
There was not additional funding in the police department under the target budget for additional personnel.
Okay.
That being said, the target, we can't fund the original target budget.
Right.
And when it was presented, the original target was about $250,000 in deficit. But we had started that way in the prior year, and as we moved forward and we received our retirement assessments and our health insurance renewal and the state budget, we were able to close that fairly easily. So I had hoped that we would be able to do the same thing this year. The difference this year is we have a new governor, so the budget comes out a month later. We did receive our retirement assessment, and it's significantly higher than what was anticipated, and I'm still trying to look into, get the detail behind it. It's not a mistake, but just get the detail behind it. And we don't have health insurance yet, so what I thought we could fund under the target budget, we're not going to be able to fund under the target budget,
thank you.
or under the proposed budget.
Right. Yep, thanks, Carrie.
That was all the concerns that they had. Jeff.
Okay, Jay, Sewer Commission?
They're working on their budget, looking for projects they can get done with the project money. And they got their other Sunset Lane, Pratt Avenue is moving along. So their biggest topic was work on the budget.
Okay. Green Community?
They met the other night, Tuesday night. Well, you heard from the library. They were there to discuss their situation. They're working on, I guess they got the bids for doing the parking lot lights for the library and the public safety. And they're looking for projects to do. They have, I guess, a significant amount of money that they can do projects with that I wasn't aware of. So they're looking to, get some projects going forward.
Great. Karen, School Committee?
I have nothing on Monty Tech, nothing to report there. And School Committee, and Mrs. Luck can correct me if I'm wrong, at the request of the school board, Superintendent Combs has gone back and added her paraprofessionals in, I believe, at all levels, which increased their budget by 9%, to 9%, from 6.09 to 9%. So I'm sure she'll go over all that when she's here in a couple of weeks. And she and I also had a nice discussion last week. I had met with her around the whole school choice thing. and their elevated numbers, and she's starting to figure out where that's coming from. So I think she'll provide some more information as she starts figuring out those numbers. But it does appear that there was a pretty significant error in the numbers that came from the state. The interesting thing that I found out was that when somebody moves into Lunenburg and they are school choiced to, say, Leominster, and I'm just using this as an example, they never have to register with Lunenburg as ever having, even living here. So when she gets these lists, some of these kids she's never seen before. And that differs greatly from the way Lunenburg children and students have to register in town. We have to provide 3 forms of proof of residency. They never have to prove that they live here in order for us to pay their tuition. It comes on a list with an address and a name. So we had a little bit of a discussion around there, and maybe we're a unique community, and that this is, maybe it's not happening to a lot of other towns. But we look, from what she has provided with me, like we are paying a heck of a lot of money for kids that have school choice to other districts that just moved into Lunenburg, but they never have to prove that they don't have to come in front of anybody from Lunenburg to say, we moved here, we live here, here's our 3 pieces of residency. So we had a conversation on that, on, is it something that we need to take up with the state, and who does that, to say to them, there's a loophole here that needs to be closed so that these kids, we can prove that they are actually Lunenburg residents. So it was an interesting discussion with her, and I do expect her to have some more information from us when she does her presentation in a few weeks.
Good, thank you. Anything else?
Nope.
Okay. Council on Aging, Caroline's not here. School Building Committee met last week. The construction of the structural steel is underway now in Area B. What was Area A is now known as Building A, as the structural steel for that part is complete. In total, the structural steel is about 30% complete as of last week. The concrete work is complete, and the site work has been demobilized until the rest of the building is complete. They're going to be installing temporary lighting in Building A once the roof structure is complete. We have a need to sign a temporary agreement with Unitil for a transformer that's being delivered at the end of January, and the permanent easement for that transformer will be voted at annual town meeting. So we have to have a temporary agreement that bridges the time until annual town meeting, but we're working to get that agreement in place so that the transformer can be installed. Overall, the project remains on schedule and on budget. So we're making good progress. In Building Reuse Committee, no report. Mr. Rogers.
I'll be brief. First issue is the schools. I read in the paper, excuse me, that they have 2 former modular buildings that they want to do something with, and I don't know who to go to, and while I was here, I thought I'd mention it to you folks, and maybe you could, if you thought it was appropriate, you could redirect it. As I go by the cemetery building on Holman Street, I'm appalled at its condition, and thought maybe one of the buildings could be used down there to brighten things up and to get the thing squared away. The other, I thought, place for its possible use would be at the sanitary landfill, to see if it could, if they could be used down there. And I know there's all kinds of issues with transporting and stuff, but I throw it out there just for, consideration. Second issue, Chapter 90. I thought I listened to, saw, or read that the governor, and I guess it was the then governor, Deval Patrick, had made some borrowing so that the cities and towns would get more money back for roads. Have you folks heard anything about that?
Yes.
Okay.
One of the first things that our new governor did was release the remaining one-third of the total Chapter 90 funds that were approved by the legislature.
Okay.
Governor Patrick had only released the first two-thirds of it.
Okay.
So there is more Chapter 90 funding coming to the town.
Okay. My point is, it would be great to know, just for the citizenry, I think, what that number is and how it relates to the road project and what, just totally what we get for Chapter 90. That's all. The other issue I have, and I was late because the good folks from the library were leaving. I wanted you to to be aware of this, and I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, but every Tuesday, the Lions Club meets at the library, and we met there, and we were meeting, and all of a sudden, the heat was supposed to come on, and it was air conditioning, and it was blowing on us like crazy. So being the shy individual that I am, hesitant about going down there, I went down and talked to the nice folks at the desk and said, "I'm freezing. What's going on?" "Oh, that happens all the time." This heating system, they said, never worked from the get-go, and I don't know what is going to go on. I said, "Well, okay, I just wanted to make you aware of it." The reason I bring it up to you is if we're having inordinate increases in electricity and gas, maybe part of it's due to that, okay? Now, I always like to try and leave whatever kind of a discussion I have with people smiling and laughing. So I'm gonna tell you my idea, and you can say, "Here he goes again. He's whacked." There's a bunch of money in the bill, in the total request of the capital to put new carpeting in, and I guess it couldn't be done because nobody figured in the cost of moving all of the the books, right? Well, this is the laugh. If you have a book case here, rather than moving the bookcase, why don't we just carpet up to the bookcase, glue it down really well, and go on about our life? Would that not be a reasonable thing to do? So I don't think that you folks have an answer to that, and I wouldn't expect you to, but I just something to think about. I mean, it just didn't make any sense, okay? The last thing, and this is an even better laugh for you, when my dear wife Karen and I were poor 3 years ago, we didn't necessarily have all the money that we needed to paint our entire house. So what we did was we painted the front, and then the next year we painted the side, and Karen was really good and she saved like crazy so that we could finish the back and the other side, and that's how we painted our house. Could we not do the same thing here? I mean, I'm sure that there's going to be those that say, well, you got to set up this and it's that, and the paint goes up and all of that, and that's probably true. But these are tough times, folks. Why don't we look at all these various alternatives, and maybe the answer is no, you can't do it, and that Rogers is crazy again, and, be done with it. But I offer it for your consideration, and I thank you for the opportunity to come before you. But more importantly, I thank you for all the time that you serve on behalf of the taxpayers in town. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Future agenda items, we're going to hold these until after budget season. Next meetings, February 12th, we'll be receiving the town manager's budget presentation. That's our regularly scheduled time.
No, it's not. Are we not meeting the first week in February? Because don't we meet the first and the third?
We meet the second and fourth.
Okay, I'm good. Don't put that in the paper. Okay, that sounds good.
We have a
Nope,
special meeting
it's-
on
okay.
the 19th.
I think that's what threw me off. Okay.
And then a regular meeting again on the 26th. And our schedule at this time Again, Kerry's budget presentation on the 12th. Library, Council on Aging, Land Use and Administration, Unclassified and Debt Service on the 19th. And then Public Safety, Police and Fire on the 26th of February.
I think you're also thrown off because it's a 5-week month.
No, it's the 19th that threw me off,
Okay.
because I was thinking that was our regular meeting.
Okay? Anything else for this evening?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Second.
Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No. 8:42.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Would you like to keep these?